Hey guys, welcome back to the Helen Bellin Show. It has been a long time since I have done a movie review, but after seeing Smile, this really interesting breakout horror film of 2022, I decided to kind of go back to my roots a little bit and tell you my thoughts and analysis of this film. So if you're interested, keep watching, and as always, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be alerted when I post new videos. Smile is a film about a protagonist, a therapist named Rose. She works at a hospital ward where they deal with very disruptive, sometimes delusional patients, patients that are having, they're hurting themselves, they're hurting others. Like this is like one of those institutional wards, right? So they're dealing with pretty severe mental health issues. And during her time working at this ward, Rose has become very dedicated to her work. She has thrown herself in. She's working 80-hour weeks. She's staying overnight at the hospital. Like she's almost like very much neglecting herself in order to help her patients. And so there is one girl who comes in who's having, she's hearing voices, she's having what they call delusions. And all of this started happening to this girl when she saw her professor kill himself in front of her. Now, this girl is a PhD student. She was studying under this professor. She's a very bright, intelligent girl, and yet she's believing that there's some entity stalking her and some entity that's telling her that she's going to die. And so Rose listens. She, listens compassionately. She listens intensely to what this girl is saying. She's asking her, what does it look like? What do you see? How do you feel? She's like, hey, this entity, it appears as people I know sometimes. Sometimes it appears as people I don't know. And sometimes it looks like my grandfather who killed himself when I was a little girl. Now, this really strikes a chord with Rose because we see in the beginning of the film, Rose witnessed her mom passing away. And there's a little bit detail there that we get to at the end, which I'll get to. Rose really connects with this idea like, oh, wow, you see your grandfather who passed away. She's connecting with that because she saw her mom pass away. And so she's talking to this girl and she's like, do you see the thing right now? Do you see the entity now? The girl's like, no, I don't see it. But of course, during the course of their conversation, this entity appears. And this is the scene that we see in the trailer where she's seeing the entity. She's saying no, she's screaming no. And then Rose, seeing that this girl is having an episode, she turns her back on the girl to call for help so that they can come and help this girl, like restrain her, give her some medication to sedate her. She turns around and the girl is looking at her with that sinister smile, and she has a piece of glass in her hand, piece of pottery from like a plant that she broke or something, and she proceeds to slit her throat in front of Rose while wearing a full-fledged smile on her face. So this is obviously just extremely traumatizing event. I'm sitting in the film, and before the girl even kills herself, I'm already like, okay, I know what this film is about. This film is a metaphor for how mental illness affects people in life, how people react to people who have mental illness, how professionals react to it, and, what people suffer with and deal with when facing mental illness themselves. This theme of disparaging statements about people with mental illness. After this girl kills herself, the police come in to try to understand what happened so that they can report to this girl's family what happened and try to explain it somehow. They're like, look, just give us some clinical term, some diagnosis that we can tell her family, like, so we can understand what's happening here. And she's like, well, I didn't really have a lot of time to diagnose her, because literally Rose and this girl had only been talking for like 10 minutes before this girl killed herself. So she didn't have time to really diagnose anything. And one of the police officers like, oh, so she's a head case. Using the term head case as kind of a disparaging term for someone who may be having mental illness symptoms. And it turns out that in this questioning, when the police are questioning her, one of the detectives is an ex-boyfriend of Rose's. The lead detective, if you will, he's making these statements about mental health patients. And I'm like, it really stood out. Like, they made a point in the film, I guess, to really center on that. Another disparaging statement that's made is when Rose and her fiance go to meet Rose's sister and Rose's brother-in-law at dinner. And Rose's sister, is very self-absorbed, talking about her life, talking about everything that's going on. But when they do turn the conversation to Rose, she asks Rose, she's like, why are you still working at the hospital with those crazies? Why don't you start your own practice? And Rose is just like, I love this work. I want to help people, blah, blah, blah. So there's at least two statements in the film where people are being very dismissive, very condescending towards people with mental illness. And I think that's an important way to set up how people view it. They view it as stay away from that, get away from that place. You can do so much better than working with those types of people. And even professionals like the police officer are making these sort of statements. A couple of details here for moving forward is that, as I may have mentioned, Rose's boyfriend is one of the police officers that interviews her at the hospital. He comes to her later and even tries to check on her, right? And we find that out through that dialogue. He says, hey, I was just assigned to this case. I didn't mean to get assigned to it. I wasn't doing this to get close to you or anything, but I do want to, come by the hospital and make sure you're okay. The other aspect of this is along that same lines, pretending to be okay, pretending to not be affected by it. So this police officer, Rose's ex-boyfriend, asks her if she's okay. She says, yep, I'm fine. She almost feels like she has to put on that face. And that maybe is more understandable because a lot of times with our exes, we feel like we want to be okay. We don't want them to feel like we have to depend on them. But even when her fiance asks her if she's okay, she does admit that it shook her up and they have this moment of hugging. But she's not fully honest with how it's affecting her, how deeply. Because before her fiance comes in the room, she sees one of those entities staring at her, smiling. She sees the girl in the corner smiling at her with a sinister smile. She doesn't tell her boyfriend that from the beginning. She just says, oh yeah, it was just a really tough day. One of my patients killed themselves, but she doesn't really reveal how deeply it affected her. These sorts of disparaging statements and attitudes make people much more vigilant about not being perceived as mentally ill themselves. These statements make people much more vigilant about being like, oh no, I'm fine. I just saw someone slit their throat in front of me, but I'm fine. But the truth is, and this is the third point, the truth is that anybody can suffer with mental illness. Just as the girl told Rose, this entity shows up as sometimes people they know, people they don't know, people who've killed themselves in the past. It's a really good indication, a really good representation of how mental illness can show up in people like this PhD student who's highly intelligent, people like Rose who are, professionals and obviously highly intelligent professionals. And her hallucinations get so bad that she ends up inadvertently asking for a patient to be restrained because she thinks that this patient is trying to attack her. Turns out in real life, the patient is not. And that leads her to being called into the office by her boss, who asked her, okay, what happened? You say that he was trying to attack you. I've never seen any aggressive behavior from this patient. Is it possible that, what happened with this girl killing herself in front of you now has you on edge? And so her boss ends up giving her a week of paid leave because he feels like she's overworked, she's not taking care of herself, and that may be causing her to be a risk to the patients. And so, the other part, kind of point number 4, is as Rose starts becoming more unhinged, if you will, or, this entity starts affecting her more and more, now her job's at risk. Rose is beginning to lose some of the things which in the past had helped her mask the problems that she was having. So when her boss puts her on leave, that's a really big event for her because work was the way that she was able to avoid thinking about and talking about what happened to her mom, why she was neglecting certain aspects of her life. And certainly when this girl kills herself, she doesn't want that to seem like it's affecting her. Well, it turns out her nephew's birthday party is coming up, so she decides that she's going to buy him a gift and she is going to attend that. The night before the birthday party, her alarm goes off. She looks around, but she doesn't see anybody there. She gets a call from what seems to be the security company asking her for the code to the alarm. And all of a sudden, the person on the other line who is saying that they're from the security company is like, is anybody there with you, Rose? And she's like, no, I don't think so. And she's like, are you sure? Turn around, Rose. It's like really scary, right? Because she's thinking it's the person from the security company, but it seems like it's actually the entity trying to scare her and trying to whatever. And so that whole thing happens. She goes to the back door. She sees the back door is ajar. That's seemingly what set off the alarm. And the cat that she had as a pet is gone. Right? And so there are several of these different incidents where we're led to believe that she's either imagining these things happening, imagining these entities talking to her, and then all of a sudden we cut to another scene, and it turns out it wasn't real. She ends up pulling out a knife because she thinks somebody's in the house, and she's trying to protect herself, and her fiance is like freaked out, like, why do you have a knife in your hand? Like, there's a couple of these incidents that happen leading up to the birthday party where she's seeing things and believing that something's talking to her and believing that something is trying to get her. So, but the day of the birthday party's coming up and she has to go, right? And we see her in the mirror putting on concealer again, trying to hide the fact she hasn't been sleeping, trying to hide the fact that this entity is apparently getting stronger and closer to her and affecting her more and more, and just trying to put on a happy face and go to the party to show a happy face to her sister. Well, she goes to the party, and she had gone to the store to buy a model train for her nephew, something that, the sister told her the nephew would want, and so it's time for him to open up the gift. But when he opens up the box, inside the box is the cat, and the cat is dead. So everybody at the party's like, everybody's screaming and all of that. And she's like, no, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. It was the entity. She's trying to explain. And as the audience member, we're thinking, is this real? Is this another one of her like imaginings or whatever? But literally everybody in the party is freaking out. And all she sees in the corner is the entity like this, just smiling, And at that point, she knows it was the entity that killed the cat, or maybe she did it in a rage. She doesn't remember, and she ends up falling down, hurting her hands, hurting her wrists, and they end up having to take her to the hospital. She's already on a paid leave at her job. Now she's in the hospital. Her family ends up calling her boss to the hospital in response to this incident at the birthday party. So she's starting to lose everything. And so this is one of the reasons why, even though we can criticize Rose putting on makeup, going to the party, even though maybe that was a time where she should have just sat that one out, the stakes are so high for people. And if they admit that they're suffering with mental illness or something may be going on with them or some things are happening to them that they can't explain, they fear exactly what just happened to Rose, which is that the job consequences get more severe. Family members start to distance themselves. And to be clear, it's reasonable that her family members would distance themselves after you come to my child's birthday party and inside the box is a dead cat. I'm concerned now, right? Like, it's not like a lot of these responses are unreasonable. What else could the hospital administration do except give her paid leave when they feel the patients are in danger, right? Like, these steps in and of themselves seem perfectly reasonable, but it's just the fact of, it starts this cycle where the person who's suffering with mental illness feels like there's no one they can talk to, there's no one they can turn to. Which brings me to the other point that I noticed, which is that often clinical professionals and medication are used to mask the deep and long work that needs to be done to really help someone with mental illness. Even Rose, in her role as a therapist at the hospital, gets caught up in this. When the girl comes to her talking about this entity that's affecting her and all of that, Rose immediately is going to clinical diagnosis, what's going on with this girl, and I'm not saying she didn't care. She did listen empathetically, but it's getting to how do we fix it? How do we fix it? How do we fix it? And sometimes things aren't as fixable right away. And when Rose starts having all of these issues, she sees a psychiatrist that she had seen previously. We learned through the dialogue that she had been seeing a psychiatrist and stopped. But now things have gotten very extreme. Like I said, she's pulled a knife out and is thinking that someone's coming after her. All of this stuff is happening, right? And so now she's desperate and she's going to the psychiatrist to try to get help and telling her what's happening. But during this meeting with the psychiatrist, again, she's approaching it from a very clinical view. She's trying to self-diagnose herself. She's trying to, and the psychiatrist is like, look, avoid self-diagnosis. Tell me what's going on. Let's talk about this. And Rose is like, look, do you think I can get this medication? She names a medication. She's like, can I get this medication? Gonna help me? I haven't been sleeping, blah, blah, blah. And the psychiatrist, I really like the way they wrote this role or wrote out this scene. The psychiatrist is like, look, I don't think medication is appropriate right now. Let's see how you're doing next week. I encourage you to rest. I encourage you to do something else. I encourage you to, just take some time to yourself. And I want us to resume regular sessions. The psychiatrist even tries to talk to her about her mom. She's like, you told me your mom took her own life. Can we talk about that? She's like, no, I don't want to relitigate that. So the point is, she's losing some of the support from people around her due to the effects of what's happening with this entity. But at the same time, when she does seek a psychiatrist and the psychiatrist attempts to delve deeper into these issues, she doesn't want to do that either. So it's like a catch-22, right? And instead, she's looking for medication to quickly try to get past this and go back to masking the problems. And let me be clear here. I'm not anti-medication. I'm not anti-psychiatry. I believe that medication very well could be a part of a regimen designed for somebody by a professional. And I'm not a professional, okay? But I think one of the critiques that the movie is putting forth is the ways in which people want only medication. They don't want the regular therapy sessions. They don't want to delve into the pain of what happened. They just want the medication because masking the problem is more comfortable for them in some ways than actually having to delve into it and go through maybe a year or 2 years of therapy and really work through what is happening, what trauma they've suppressed. Even the fiance, when things get really bad, even he ends up calling the psychiatrist at some point. He says, Rose, I just called the psychiatrist because I was trying to help. Well, sure, you wanted the psychiatrist to help, but was it also that you wanted this fixed? This is now interfering with your life. This is now messing things up. This is now making things more difficult for you. And you want the psychiatrist to come in here like Bob the Builder and just fix it back up and fix it and make it okay, when this could be something that's going to take a lot longer to work through. Right. So I think the film is also talking about that. Now, moving towards the end, of course, I can't get into the whole film because we'd be here all day. The film's like an hour and a half or so, maybe even longer. But the other theme, and kind of towards the end, is the theme of self-isolation. So because Rose has now isolated so many people in her life, she doesn't really trust the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist is trying to do some other stuff that Rose doesn't want to do. Rose just wants to fix it and go back to her old life. Rose enlists the help of her ex-boyfriend, the cop, to help her investigate how these suicides are connected. Her patient committed suicide in front of her after seeing her professor commit suicide. Rose believes that there's a chain of events happening here, and she uses, she asks her ex-boyfriend to help her investigate it. They find 20 similarly related crimes, 19 deaths. So there's one person who did not kill themselves. Instead, this person killed somebody else, and now they're locked up in jail. So they end up going to visit this guy who seemingly survived. He killed somebody, but he survived himself. He didn't commit suicide. And they want to find out how he did it. How did he survive? What happened? And so he tells Rose, he's like, look, the way this entity works, it needs other people to see the suicide. It needs the trauma to spread. So the only way to get rid of it, if you don't commit suicide yourself in front of somebody, is to kill somebody in front of somebody. Kill somebody else. It's the only way it can get away from you. Only way you can pass it on. Those are the only two options. So that's why he survived, is because he murdered someone else in front of, in a very gruesome way. Murdered someone else in front of somebody, and it passed on to that person who witnessed it. So, of course, this theme of trauma, it has been documented that when suicides are publicized, it can have a ripple effect. When a student commits suicide in a school and it becomes known, there are other students who may also commit suicide after that. So there's kind of this viral effect that occurs. And again, it's really tough because you're promoting the fact that this person committed suicide because you're trying to prevent it. You're trying to prevent other people from doing it. But that promotion in the name of prevention also can sometimes trigger other people to do it. So there is this effect that they've they've observed. Now, the part where my metaphor kind of breaks down, or my analysis kind of breaks down, is he tells her the only other way, aside from killing herself, is to kill somebody else. Like I said, through their mental illness, sometimes maybe not kill other people, but they can harm other people, right? Through some of the effects of it. So anyway, after finding this out, after finding out that it seems there's only two options to get rid of this thing, Rose decides that she can't kill somebody. You know, she just can't see herself doing that. She obviously doesn't want to kill herself. So she feels like the best way is to isolate herself and face the entity one-on-one. So that way she can defeat the entity and not put anyone at risk. If we go along with my metaphor or my analysis that this is about mental illness, often mental illness is exactly what it makes people want to do. People with mental illness feel like they're being a burden. They feel like they're putting people at risk. They feel like other people are hurting because of the symptoms. And so they say, hey, look, I'm just going to isolate myself and deal with it on my own. Right? And that rarely works out. And certainly in this film, it doesn't really work out. She goes back to her old house. She has this like very intimate talk with her mom, the ghost of her dead mom. And it seems as if she's actually gotten over it herself. So she's been successful. She's burned down the house. She's gone through all these like ritual purification aspects, like purification rituals. And it seems like it's worked, but we find out, no, it did not. And, yeah, I mean, I won't give away too much of that ending, but basically it did not work out. And yeah. And so the overall message that we get is that ultimately she needed other people to help her to get rid of it. And I think that's the theme of the movie, is that you can't do it alone. And if you try to do it alone, you'll just end up continuing the cycle and passing it on to other people. And, you know, I'll just leave it there. Anyway, that is my analysis of the movie Smile. What do you think? Do you think this is a metaphor for mental illness? Do you think this was a really good movie? Do you think that you would like to see more movies like this in the future? Another movie that's made that is seen as a metaphor for mental illness is The Babadook. I think that one's on Netflix, so you can watch that one. What do you think about this genre of movies that attempts to take mental illness and use it in a scary movie context? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Comment below, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.